welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted to have all of you take the time out of your busy schedule and join us tonight for our final of the year, Biz After Biz, and it's our holiday jingle mingle, as we're calling it, just because I can throw that name in and get away with it. As many of you know, I'm Greg Webb. I'm the General Manager here with the Bancroft and District Chamber of Commerce. My assistant is Carly Irwin, sitting over there all smiling and happy and helping in every way that she can. And of course we have Lee Bay with us tonight, and we'll come back to Lee in a moment. Lee's also a director on the board and our treasurer, and I'm thrilled to have Lee on the board with us. And also I'd like to acknowledge Vicki Parlat, who's our first vice president with the chamber as well on the board. Thank you again, Vicki, for hanging in there with us and getting us all through. So tonight is kind of a little different of a concept. My typical style is that I let everybody come in, we kind of mix and mingle, and we do our go around the room and talk about what we've been up to with our business. We're not going to do that this evening. We're kind of switching it around. We're going to let you have the networking part of it at the end of the evening, with the most important and crucial part of it right now, in case you do have to leave. And of course we weren't really sure as to what the weather was going to be like. Lee's going to give an overview on the kind of the process and the protocol, because we are going to be videotaping the program for tonight so that we can play it for our members on our own private login, for the ones that weren't able to be here tonight.
People have attended some of my workshops before, and they know that I have an interrupt me policy, so that if you're not following along, I like people to stop me. Because we have Clive here from the Eagle Video Productions, in order to have this go as far as possible into our membership, he's filming tonight. So instead of that interrupt me policy, I'm just going to ask everybody if they can please try to keep their questions until the end, and then that way it makes it easier for the video to go on. I'm kind of accustomed to standing up here and making a fool out of myself. I've never done it on camera before, so you'll have to forgive me if I start stammering and umming, doing things like that until I get a little acclimatized to what he's doing over there. So what we're looking at is Unwrapping Bill 148, the Fair Workplaces Better Jobs Act of 2017, which a lot of stuff has ramifications for everybody that's here, anybody that has employees. And I was talking to the Ministry of Labor today, and Kim asked me to speak slower, so I'll try to speak slower. So I just realized I was speeding along there. The Ministry of Labor does not have anything in place yet. They are still stumbling through the training process, and yet the rest of us are supposed to take off on January 1st. So what you're going to see today is a compilation of things from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, from the Canadian Council of Economic Advisory, as well as the Financial Accountability Office. And in between, if you see anything tongue-in-cheek or sarcastic, that's me. So don't try to blame that on anybody else. So just so that everybody can have a look at the agenda that we're looking at, we will be looking at the highlights of what is coming up, the background that got us to this point, the timeline that is going to happen on, and then a little bit on each of the changes, followed by the consequences and risks that we're going to be facing, as well as some strategies to try and get through this as best as we possibly can. So as far as the highlights, we're looking at minimum wage increases, pay equity, personal emergency leave, the leave for domestic and sexual violence, paid vacation and stat holiday pay, scheduling and on-call, the misclassification of employees, and union certification. So as I was putting this whole thing together, the first thing that I did was create a certificate of hypocrisy for Kathleen Wynne. At the beginning of 2017, she said, we've got a really good process that actually depoliticizes the increases to the minimum wage. And this was in response to the panel that she had put together in 2013, who recommended that the rate of increase to minimum wage would follow along with inflation. It would be announced on March 1st every year, and it would be implemented October 1st every year, and that took effect in October of 2014. She went on to say that it is the responsible way to move forward. It is very important to her that we have a predictable and sustainable way of seeing increases to the minimum wage. So that was as recent as April of this year, and then all of a sudden we fast forwarded to May when she announced we will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the largest increase in our province's history. There was no economic impact analysis. There was absolutely no intention to do one in spite of the warnings from the Financial Accountability Office. The combination of Wynne and Kevin Flynn passed the legislation, and they were touting the consistent, impartial, predictable process. So I thought to myself, what on earth was their motivation in changing this? They're the ones that implemented it back in 2013. They stood by it even as recently as January, and it was like, okay, there had to be some motivation that brought this on, that they would turn and they would rework that whole thing over the course of 6 months and have this level of change. And I had to sit and think, what was their thought process? What exactly were they thinking when they were doing this, that they would put the economy at risk? And I think if anybody has noticed,
Vote.
Yeah.
so there is an election June 7th of next year, and they will be on a ticket together, and I've decided I've coined a new phrase for what their campaign should be called. They're going to be motivated. So when they announced that they were putting together this bill, the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis decided that they were going to actually look into it. They knew that the government had done absolutely nothing in order to study what their recommendations were. And so the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis is a socio-economic research consulting organization. It's private. And they do independent evidence-based analysis, focusing on risks and returns, measuring, profiling, and forecasting from data results. They put together a study. It was 210 pages long, and this was some of the highlights. The first being that it will put the province $440 million in debt in only 2 years. And this is a group of experts that are doing this. It'll put 185,000 Ontario jobs at risk. There will be 1,810 jobs at risk in Peterborough. This was the Keep Ontario Working version of the sub-study that was done. There will be 190 jobs at risk in Haliburton County. And it will mean a $23 billion hit to business over the next 2 years alone. And it will increase consumer goods and services by $1,300 per household each year. So much for the people that were making minimum wage, that just takes their increase, throws it right out the window. So, there's a comic up there, which is kind of ironic that it's comical and yet it's not. The good news is the minimum wage is now $15, and the bad news is I have to cut your hours. So the Minimum Wage Advisory Panel reported that raising the minimum wage reduces employment. A higher minimum wage leads to an increase in poverty. And that was from their study back in 2013. They in turn were citing a 2011 study which found a 10% increase was associated with a 4 to 6% increase in the percentage of families living under low-income cutoffs, the LICO in Canada, between 1981 and 2004. The higher minimum wage trigger higher unemployment. The panel explained which results in more poverty as household incomes drop among low-income families. There are 1.6 million Ontarians earning less than $15 an hour, And my question is that statistics gonna go up or is it gonna go down? That's a pretty serious question. Currently, 60% of minimum wage earners are teens and youth. With the increase to the $15 an hour for January 2019, that statistic is going to be 60% are going to be adults. Income-geared housing will rise or potentially be disqualified. Trillium benefits and sales tax benefit or credits will drop, and the working income benefit that people get on their income tax is not going to be available to those people. So here we're looking now at the schedule of when things are going to be happening. So the critical illness and parental leave has already started. It started as soon as there was royal assent. Employee misclassification also started when it was assent, as well as the elevated heel footwear. The biggest one for me there was the employee misclassification, and the reason that they brought that in right away was that they realized that there would be a lot of employers that would shuttle a lot of their duties onto people that were either subcontractors or self-employed, and in doing so that would take away a lot of the source deductions that they were going to gain by having the minimum wage go up. So that's why they had that happen immediately, and they cut that line and said, okay, we're going to start looking at who is an employee and who isn't an employee. So for January 1, 2018, in this column here, we have minimum wage at $14 an hour starting. The bill concerning the temp agencies and how those people are paid and what kind of notices they get. The increase to vacation pay for people who are working more than 5 years with one employer, including any leaves. The personal emergency leave changes that affect everybody now who has less than 50 employees. The domestic sexual violence. And then moving on to April, that's when the equal pay kicks in. In June will be the changes to the union and certification bargaining. And then finally, January 1, 2019, the minimum wage will increase to $15. There'll be scheduling and on-call changes, the right to refuse shifts, and the ability to request location changes in the workplace. The thing that's not listed on there is that once we reach January 1, 2019, the increase geared to inflation will take effect again, and in October of 2019 we'll be back to another increase, and that will be based on whatever inflation is. My prediction is that inflation is going to rise over all of this, so I've tried to use the same figures as have been recent, which averages out to about 2% in anything that I've done, but I'll be very surprised if that's how things continue. So let's look at some of the changes. Actually, maybe I should stop for a minute and see if everybody is okay. Changes. One of the first things is the personal emergency leave. So after 1 week of employment, it's 1 whole week of employment, everyone is entitled to 10 job-protected personal emergency leave days for all employees, 2 of which are paid. You can no longer request doctor's notes, and the information concerning the proof is to follow after January 1st, 2018. Again, I had a conversation with the Ministry of Labor and said, what can we ask for? And they said, we don't know yet, we'll get back to you. So I'm assuming it's going to be things like if the emergency had to do with somebody passing, then you could ask for a death certificate, or you could ask for travel accommodation, proof of that, but they really are not providing that at all. An interesting thing about this personal emergency leave is that there is only one other province that offers this, and that's PEI, and they offer 1 day after 5 years of employment. So here we are in Ontario leading the way again. So, the next thing is the job protected leave for violence, victims of domestic or sexual violence, or parents of children who have experienced it or threatened with it will get 5 days of paid leave and up to 15 weeks of unpaid leave. Again, it will be the first 5 days. So, Welcome, Paul. Thanks for coming.
You want to go?
I'll catch up on the rest of it tomorrow. The next is the bereavement and care leave. So parents whose children pass away will get unpaid job protected leave of up to 104 weeks. It's interesting to note that all of the time from all of the leaves is still calculated in your 5 years of employees. So if you have people who have been off for 2 years for various reasons, they still, that the counter is still on as to how soon they receive their 6% vacation pay. That leave also applies to parents whose children go missing. And then in addition to that, there's leave without pay up to 37 weeks to provide care to certain critical ill individuals. Originally, I thought it was going to apply to those who are considered immediate family under the Minister of Finance regulations, but it actually is a very long list of people that are your in-laws, your in-laws' relatives, and on and on and on it goes. Something to consider with that is that we're in a small town. Many people are related to the same people. So when you have someone who gets critically ill or passes away, chances are you're going to have more than one employee need the time in order to go. So it's something I think that it's not as common in cities. And the leave without pay up to 37 weeks, there's some circumstances you get 15 weeks, some is 17, some is 28, but the maximum amount is 37 weeks. Statutory holiday pay. There's a new calculation formula for statutory holiday pay and substituted days, and it's all very complex. There's been at least a dozen accountants that both within the organizations that I mentioned at the beginning, as well as accountants that I know, and they're all scrambling to try and figure out what exactly, how do you calculate this? In the end, it does average out to approximate daily wages, but because there are such increased fines and penalties for doing it wrong, they're really looking for direction from the Ministry of Labor as to just exactly how they're supposed to do that. And I'm sure companies like QuickBooks are really interested in knowing that information too. So, but the bottom line is that it will probably be averaged out to a daily wage. So previously, if you had an employee that was working about 3 days a week, they would end up with about 5 hours of pay for their statutory holiday pay, but now they will end up with an entire day's pay in spite of them having less hours. So. Then you have the paid vacation. So there will be 3 weeks paid vacation for all employees with 5 years of service, including their leaves of absence, and it will be calculated at a 6% rate. There is equal pay for equal work. That's one that doesn't come in until later in the year. So all employees will be paid equally when performing the same job for the same employer. This includes agency temporary workers. So essentially where it used to be, say you were an accountant's office and it's tax season and you want to bring people in to help out to get all the paperwork done, they will either hire from a temporary agency or they will hire from in some people will do this as a part-time or from home business in addition to the jobs that they're currently doing. So when they come in, they normally do not get paid the same as their full-time bookkeepers because they're only there temporarily. They are just a backfill position, and that is changing now. So they would bring these people in for minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage and get the job done and pass everything over. But essentially they are doing the job of a bookkeeper. So if you're paying your bookkeepers $20 an hour, you're now going to be paying those people the $20 an hour as well, because if they're essentially doing the same thing, you have to do it. They are making some exemptions.
Please, quick question, is there any consideration for student?
There is a separate wage for students.
So it's not the same as, let's say you had a student accountant, the student wouldn't be getting $20 an hour.
No, not if they're enrolled in student. So there will be exemptions for merit, seniority, and production output. Again, the onus is going to be on the employer to prove that there was a difference in the merit, in the seniority, or the production output. It can't just be, this person's been doing this job for 20 years and this person's been doing this job 3 years. That's not enough. It has to be that they have worked their way through the ranks, that you have a chart made up that says that a person that starts is earning this, and as they gain experience and training, they will work their way up. It simply is, if this is the same work, you cannot discriminate against it just based on the fact the person's been there longer. Production output is a pretty simple one when you're working in a factory or in a piecework situation where you can say, yes, this person has produced half again as much as that person. It's an easy fix. But how do you do that when you're in retail? How do you have that shining employee that's running around doing everything and anything that needs doing, even without being asked to do it, and you have someone else that you have to kind of drag them along and advise them every day? But if essentially they're both running the till and serving customers, you're paying them the same. So you have to come up with creative ways to document how it is that what this person that's doing a shining example is doing better than this person, and you have to be able to cover that. So
would a pay scale rubric be helpful in that kind of?
it would
if you don't already
definitely
have it.
Definitely. It's going to be all about the documentation and all about how you approach recording that information. And so when the 175 new enforcement people that are being hired are running around fighting people instead of running around giving presentations like this, like literally I should not be the one standing here giving you this presentation. It should be someone from the Ministry of Labor. It should be one of those 175 people giving you this instruction, and they're not. That their job is strictly going to be enforcement. And what is that saying? We just want to find you doing things wrong.
So you're gonna get paid the same amount as they are next year.
So one of the biggest problems there is that it takes your ability to assess your employees away. If you hire 2 people on the same day, you don't know either one of them, and you want to start them both out at a small raise and give the other, the one that really shows that they're doing really well, you want to give them that advantage. And without those rubrics, without those measures of output, you can't. You simply, they both started on the same day, they're both doing the same job, and even though that one's on their phone all day long, and this one is just deep into customer service and making everybody happy and bringing people in the door, without that tracking system, you're not going to be able to do anything at all. So you have to have those preset benchmarks in order to move ahead. So administration is going to be a massive part of your business, and if any of you here would like to put up your hand how much you love paperwork, and this is, business owners are drowning in paperwork already, and it's going to become document is going to be your mantra. So, then we're looking at the scheduling changes that are going to happen. This is going to affect an awful lot of industries that have people on call, plumbers, electricians, snowplow places. 3 hours of pay is mandatory at regular wage, whether or not the on-call work is performed, and if a shift is canceled within 48 hours. So up until now, if you are working in the plumbing industry and you need to be available 24 hours because that's part of your service that you're providing, you will have a worker that is paid their fair wage right for their regular hours during the day. They work their 8 hours, and then they're given a nominal amount to be on call, just to have that pager there. If they actually get called out to work, again, they get paid their regular wage. But if they don't get called out to work, then you've only had to pay them that small amount. and that is changing now. You have to pay them at least 3 hours at their full work rate, and then up to whatever they actually work. So it's going to be a difficult thing to manage. All of a sudden, the business owners themselves are going to be the ones that are always on call, because they're not going to be able to just arbitrarily keep paying for administrative work. Essentially, is what it is. They're not going to be able to pay them a different amount for just having that pager with them. So after 3 months of work, an employee can request a schedule or location change. So this one is going to be quite interesting. If you have more than one location, say that you own a Foodland here and a Foodland in Wilberforce, and somebody lives closer to there and says, I would like to work over there. Well, now the onus is on you to explain to them why they can't work over there, and it has to be a valid reason. It can't just be, we want you here. It has to be all, completely explained in writing, and if they don't like it, they can then go to the Ministry of Labor and say, hey, I don't like the explanation they gave me, and I want to work over there.
If there's a job available over there.
Well, that doesn't, they're not factoring that part in. So,
Nights today,
Yeah.
for people on, right? Or
Yeah.
different departments.
So-
I wanna work over there now.
yes, that can be the same
We have
thing.
to accommodate.
I want to work in the cooler department. You don't have to accommodate them, but you have to have a valid reason for not accommodating them. That's the big kicker. The other thing is say you have an employee that just does administrative work. They go in and they take all your paperwork and they input it into the computer with all the data entry, and they come to you and say, I want to work from home now. I have a computer at home. I want to just be able to come in, pick that paperwork up, and take it home and do it there. Again, the onus is on you to prove to them why they can't do it. Explain to them in writing why it is that they have to come to your premises to do the job.
Yeah, is privacy and confidentiality not enough of a valid reason for that?
Well, you can write that down on a piece of paper and give it to them, and then if they so choose, they can go to the Ministry of Labor and say, is this enough? Because I really, really want to work at home.
What about a term of
So-
employment stating that you work in the office?
Well, it's all going
that
to
how it's
be a
interpreted?
tug of war between you and any employees that decide that they're gonna want to do that. So,
Happen in our office because they don't have the system at home. And they can't
So-
have it at home.
You can't stop it at home. Right.
employees have a job protected right to refuse shifts if 96 hours notice is not provided. So you have to have your shifts laid out way far in advance. Again, paperwork. Except in certain emergency situations or acts beyond the employer's control, such as weather. So this is where the snowplow people are gonna have a very small window of opportunity to be able to call their people in otherwise. But one of the reasons that the scheduling does not take effect until January of 2019 is that the ministry has not finished compiling exactly what these beyond employer's control scenarios are.
Lee, I would assume that union contracts would supersede all of this.
Until the year 2020. So if a contract comes up between now and 2020, this will supersede the contract on the date that the contract renews. And if the contract does not renew by January 2020, this will take over. So the bottom line is it's heading towards that regardless. If you have something currently in place, they'll allow you to continue for the 2 years.
Why are we doing this again?
They don't need
You
a
missed-
union, they have a union, the Ontario government.
The government's in
They're
union.
protecting everybody.
Yeah.
They have a union without having to pay dues.
Yeah, we're about to get to you right now.